There seems to be a natural inclination to type characters struggling with mental health issues and disorders as Enneagram 4, or assuming anyone suffering or struggling with these things cannot be Enneagram 7. Because yes, Enneagram 4 is when sad and emo, and Enneagram 7 is when happy-go-lucky. Yes, Enneagram 4 is associated with melancholy and deep feelings of emotional suffering, but all humans are equipped to have deep emotional experiences and to suffer. All humans have the capacity to feel worthlessness, inadequacy, and melancholy. However, it is more about whether it motivates you and your behavior frequently. There is an overlap with Enneagram and personality disorders and mental health, and it can be difficult to differentiate and identify yours and others' typings. For example, Alice Little from Alice Madness Returns, the game, is a young girl who goes through immense trauma, and the game is based around her journey to overcoming it. There is a huge assumption that characters, particularly young suffering women, are Enneagram 4s due to a melancholic, emotional, and tragic nature. Alice Little is actually an Enneagram 5 in this game. Just because we are shown with her emotional journey doesn't mean she is an emotionally based person, because in the game we are shown time and time again that she actually isolates herself from her emotional world and compartmentalizes and avoids her feelings frequently.
Someone else.
You don't know your own mind.
It's nearly a complete stranger.
What you claim not to know is merely what you've denied. You've recaptured your vagrant memories. What are you doing with them?
What are you doing?
The train must be stopped, but there's more to do. Your view conceals a tragedy. The whole truth you claim to see eludes you because you won't look at what's around you.
Mental disorders are difficult to talk about, measure, and apply in regards to typology, which is just another flaw in the pseudoscience. However, we can try our best to instead embrace that part of our identity and use it for careful identity analysis. So today we'll be focusing on Fran as our main example to define the differences between Enneagram 4 and Enneagram 7. Fran is a brilliant game by KillMonday Games, which follows our main protagonist, Fran, who is a 10 to 11-year-old girl who loses her family, blamed for the death of her parents, and escapes the psychiatric ward. She develops a deep affection and dependency on her cat, Mr. Midnight, and the game is so well made and interesting, I definitely recommend playing or watching the gameplay. The first problem we have to acknowledge when typing a character like Fran is firstly her age. She is extremely young, and behavior can be thrown away as simply, she is a child, all children behave like her. However, we will move past this as she is a fictional character who has been intentionally written a specific way, so any realistic and intrusive psychological changes on her development do not necessarily apply the same way as they do in real life. Also, a lot of her lines being creepily cheerful can be thrown away as just childish remarks. However, there is a clear difference in her comments compared to other children in the psychiatric ward, for example. So we can see throughout the story that Fran suffers from some form of schizophrenia and psychosis. However, this is not 100% confirmed. She begins to see visions of an alternate reality and has to face her trauma and the guilt she feels for the death of her parents. Whilst it's true that we can see Fran as a creative, emotional, and imaginative character that deals with emotional suffering, these traits are not Enneagram 4 exclusive. Instead, she is a great example of a sexual 7 coping with the negative and harsh reality of her life. Instead of focusing on the negatives of her life and introjecting like all Enneagram 4s do, Fran is overly optimistic and cheerful, even when placed in terrifying and confronting environments. She often makes cheerful comments on gruesome events and objects, which may allude to her defense mechanism of rationalization. She actively finds the positives in her actions to avoid guilt and pain that may hold her back from pleasure. Fran deludes herself by making positive light of everything she interacts with, reflecting immense idealization of reality and viewing everything through a rose-colored lens. Even when we are introduced to other children in the psychiatric ward, Fran is the one that seems to be skilled in persuasion, negotiation, and oral intellectualism for her age. She is able to skillfully persuade others around her, reinforcing that idea of rationalization of the 7. She also matches the Enneagram 7's tendency to plan. The Enneagram 7 will actively plan and imagine future opportunities, experiences, and activities that will bring them pleasure to feed gluttony. It is a part of the future orientation and optimism within them. This is drastically different from the Enneagram 4, who does not necessarily have this optimistic thinking. She tends to pass all negatives as positives. This is her natural way of perceiving the world. Throughout her entire journey in the game, she focuses on relying and depending on Mr. Midnight, as he is a symbol of her life before everything went wrong, a symbol for her love for fantasy and imagination, and a symbol of love and family, something she can share her love and emotional experiences with. This perfectly displays the sexual 7's one-on-one instinct, a need to merge their ideals, emotional experiences, and gluttony with another person. Fran also already knew that her parents had been murdered. She had seen it for herself, and she actively avoids accepting this fact by latching onto Mr. Midnight. She never saw or witnessed the death of Mr. Midnight, so she held on to the most positive future outcome that he was alive and believed in it fully. This represents the immense idealization of the sexual 7 and denying a pessimistic belief that Mr. Midnight could be dead. Often, an Enneagram 4 is more latched to the negative aspects of life, choosing to focus on what makes them suffer and absorbing it, which is introjection, and Fran does the complete opposite. However, when she does realize that Mr. Midnight has passed away, the entire fantastical and optimistic world she created in her own head to cope with her trauma collapses. She is forced to face the harshness of reality, which as a sexual 7 she completely denies. When she actually witnesses the death of Mr. Midnight at the hands of her own aunt, it is only then that Fran starts to break down, because she realizes she cannot rationalize this or fill in the gaps with optimism because she has just witnessed it, and it is very real firsthand. The passion of gluttony in Fran exists through Remor, the main antagonist of the game. Remor is a demon which Dr. Oswald states is the manifestation of Fran's fears and weaknesses. Remor consistently holds Fran back, holds her down, drags her back into her sadness and emotional pain, which is the thing that she is actively trying to run away from the whole game. Remor can be seen as the embodiment of Fran's trauma and mental disorder, and how she is constantly fighting with her own internal problems, which is fighting for freedom and the access to positive pleasures and experiences she wants to keep engaging in. This is vastly different from the Enneagram 4, as the Enneagram 4 has a tendency to again absorb and partake in their melancholy and tragedies. Their defense mechanism is introjection, making them absorb suffering. Fran, on the other hand, as an Enneagram 7, is actively avoiding suffering and emotional pain. Emotional pain and anxiety is the Enneagram 7's biggest fear. To add on to this, the reality of a thirster is another symbol of this extreme idealism and fantasy within Fran. It depicts a very childlike, fantastical escape world. Before Fran leaves a thirster, the wizard asks Fran if she would like to stay in this reality forever, but King Zaya states that the Valocus told him Fran is not ready. Fran does not know what this means, however by the end of the game, after discovering the truth about herself, her parents, and witnessing the death of Mr. Midnight, Fran is ready to go to the second reality of a thirster. But why wasn't she ready before? Well, I think it's because Fran in the middle of the game was still attached to the idea that Mr. Midnight was alive and that there was still hope that all was well in the real world. Fran as a sexual 7 still had this lofty, overly positive belief that she could be with Aunt Grace, and only when her rose-coloured glasses are broken is when she is ready to ascend. Sexual 7 is still a very emotional type, however, so it's easy to get the two mixed up. The sexual 7 can be mistaken for Enneagram 4, as both are drawn to deep emotional experiences and romanticizing things. There is also a stereotype that Enneagram 4 is the only type associated with creativity, uniqueness, and artistic interest, like how people mistype Lucy Gray from Hunger Games as an Enneagram 4 even though she is a sexual 7. Fran, as a sexual 7, also does not seem to be heart triad. She has a tendency to compartmentalize her own emotions and split away from them, using pleasurable experiences as a form of distraction and to replace the negative emotions she feels. This is a head triad function. They feel the need to split away from their emotions. But on the other hand, Enneagram 4s as a heart triad type will have the tendency to attach their emotions to create a certain image or to have others around them help them in coping with their emotions. So as Naranjo states, any type 4 individual identifies with that part of the psyche that fails to fit the idealized image and is always trying to achieve the unattainable. Throughout this video, I've been painting Enneagram 4 as this pessimistic, depressed character, but Enneagram 4s can be certainly healthier than this. Enneagram 4s are more concerned with self-individualization, linking to the heart triad need to give off an authentic image to fulfill their inner lack. The Enneagram 4 is more image concerned, so the Enneagram 4 can be idealistic and have fantastical ideas to cope, but it is specifically oriented towards their image. They have a need to present an idealistic, authentic image of themselves to fulfill their feelings of envy, disdain, and melancholy. The Enneagram 7 does not feel the need to focus so intensely on their image. They only focus on image to allow them to impulsively get what they want to feed gluttony, so it's not necessarily an intense emotional fulfillment thing. Overall, despite Fran being a very emotional individual who seeks authenticity similar to the traits on the Enneagram 4, she is still a character who, instead of introjecting and absorbing negative tragedies and experiences, tries to deflect and escape them. Fran is shown to be a very rebellious, anti-conventional little girl who seeks to fulfill her gluttony as best as she can through distraction, optimism, and extreme idealism. Fran attaches herself to Mr. Midnight, who is a symbol of her freedom, pleasure, and need for positive experiences. Above all else, Fran prioritizes her own pleasurable emotional experiences. So, did Fran ever manage to escape the psychiatric ward? Did she ever reunite with Mr. Midnight? Did she die in the end? Or was it all this fantasy created in a tormented little girl's mind to cope with the reality of her situation? Mental health is a difficult topic, and I think Frambo represents the ways children, especially sexual 7s, may cope with extreme trauma. Typology is simply not enough to identify the complexities of humans.